Hi, and welcome to today's video tutorial of the ADI rating BTS phase. The topic of this tutorial is runway change, and the duration is 28 minutes. You should make notes as you watch the tutorial. Please stop, scroll back, and replay the video as many times as necessary. You are required to fully understand all content of this video tutorial before your next simulation run. Remember that hard work leads to success. So now take responsibility for your own success and work as long as necessary to master the content of this tutorial. In the end of the tutorial, you get to see a short video about this topic, which will give you some additional information and helps you understand the context. Now enjoy, and good luck! As already mentioned, the topic we're talking about is runway change. During your training so far, you have learned that it is your job as air traffic controller to constantly watch all elements of weather for any changes. You can probably imagine which element has the most significant effect on your selection of the runway in use. From now on, the wind direction and speed will change during the simulation exercises. It is your job to monitor the wind indication display, notice the changing wind in time, and act accordingly, meaning changing the runway when necessary. Let's now have a look what this exactly means. The most important question that is going to bother you is, when is the best moment to change the runway? Here are a few factors that should be considered. Current meteo briefings, TOF, METAR or SPETSI reports can give you an indication about the weather situation and upcoming changes. Another determining factor can be the IFR schedules. Usually it's much more easy to hold and reroute your VFR traffic than adjusting the IFR traffic, as there are fixed schedules, and IFR traffic always has higher priority than VFR traffic. Therefore, the first priority regarding the moment for a runway change is your IFR traffic. As soon as the wind is changing, look for gaps in your IFR arrival sequence where you can fit in a runway change. You will notice that the wind won't change 180 degrees from one second to another. It will turn into a crosswind and then finally into a tailwind. The following values are important for you to consider for your runway change. The runway change can be made when the duty runway is mainly all crosswind and the tailwind on the opposite runway is less than 5 knots. As soon as the tailwind on the duty runway is more than 5 knots, the runway change must be made. Shortly said, the magic mark for you to do your runway change is 5 knots. Whenever the tailwind on a runway is bigger than 5 knots, you can't let depart or land any traffic on this runway. Here are a few points for you to remember regarding the runway change. As already mentioned, the change can occur as soon as the maximum tailwind, including gusts, does not exceed 5 knots on the opposite runway. You will see that it is quite often a good idea to do your runway change rather early than late. As soon as the window is open, start to rearrange your traffic for the opposite runway. On your InfoSim screen you have both a mean wind indication as well as a live presentation of the actual wind in this moment. The indication of gusts can vary up to plus or minus 20 degrees and plus or minus 4 knots from the mean wind presentation. Keep in mind that the selection of the runway change is primarily made in reference to your IFR arrival and departure traffic. Regarding phraseology, remember that you have to include the word tailwinds in your wind statement if there is any tailwind component. For example, Swiss 246, tailwind 140 degrees 3 knots, runway 32 clear to land. Let's now have a look at the rules of application, or in other words, how a runway change actually works. The first thing you have to do as soon as you decide to do your runway change is advising Omega Radar. Pick up your telephone, call Omega Radar and inform them that you will do a runway change. For the purpose of planning, you need to tell Omega Radar additionally what will be the last IFR arrival and departure on your current runway, as well as the first IFR arrival and departure on the new runway. This is important, so try to make it a habit from the beginning of your simulation training to call Omega Radar and give them the required information. Once you've done this coordination, you need to advise your airborne traffic of the impending runway change. You can do this with a general broadcast. All stations Omega Tower, runway change in progress. New runway news 14. Stand by for further instructions. After that, start to reposition all your inbound and circuit traffic for the new runway. In most of the cases, this means as well that you have to adjust your sequence. Let's say you have two VFR aircrafts doing circuit training on runway 32 gross, one on downwind and one on base. If you change now the runway to 14, the aircraft, which was number 2 on downwind runway 32 gross, is now suddenly number 1 on the right-hand circuit runway 14 gross. Don't forget that with the runway change, also the circuit direction changes, depending on where the aircrafts are. So changing the runway means that you have to reposition your circuit traffic and as well adjust the landing sequence. It is vital that you inform all your aircraft about their new number in sequence in order to avoid uncomfortable or even unsafe situations for you and your traffic. If you have already a traffic at the holding point when the wind is changing and there is a tailwind component, but you still want to let your traffic depart on the old runway, you have to inform the pilot and make sure that he can accept the departure under these conditions. Tailwind departures are always at pilot's discretion. In the simulation exercises, your coach will decide whether a departure is still acceptable or not. Remember though, no departures or landings are allowed in any case when the tailwind exceeds 5 knots. Here are a few important things you need to remember regarding your IFR traffic when you do a runway change. Keep in mind that if you depart an aircraft on a different runway, you need to issue a new SID. Therefore, call Omega Radar for the new IFR clearance and thereafter give it to the pilot. Also, if you reposition your aircrafts for the new runway, a change in the departure sequence may occur, depending at which positions your aircrafts are taxiing in that moment. If a change in your IFR departure sequence occurs, you must advise Omega Radar of the new sequence as soon as possible. And don't forget, if you change from runway 32 to runway 14, you now need a departure release for your IFR traffic. The most complex task in making a runway change is probably the rearrangement of your circuit traffic. This requires a lot of concentration to avoid mistakes when it comes to the circuit direction, the sequencing, and keeping the overview about all your aircrafts. Now you are presented some techniques you can use to manage your circuit traffic. All the options will be shown by an example, so pay close attention to this section as it will really help you when performing the exercises later on. The first option is holding your traffic on downwind. This is always a good idea when you need some time to do all the necessary coordination and planning, as an aircraft orbiting on downwind first doesn't fly somewhere where it gets you into trouble, and second is immediately ready to continue in the circuit for the new runway. There are a few things you need to pay attention to though. If you want to hold two aircrafts on the same downwind, always instruct the one behind to hold first. Imagine if you instruct the one in front to orbit first, there is a chance that the one behind catches up on downwind and you get into trouble. As well, always keep the picture which one of your orbiting aircrafts is which. Don't forget to reposition your strips in the correct way once you changed your runway and have a new number 1. Let's now have a look at an example to make it more clear. You can see two single-engine aircrafts doing circuit training on runway 14 gross. Hotel Bravo Charlie Juliet Mike, here as number 1 on right-hand downwind, followed by Hotel India Romeo as number 2. Now you decide to do a runway change. If you want to apply the orbit on downwind technique, which aircraft do you have to instruct to hold first? As Hotel India Romeo is following Hotel Juliet Mike, you need to let Hotel India Romeo hold first to avoid a catch-up situation. Remember, first make a general broadcast to all the aircrafts on your frequency. All stations Omega Tower, runway change in progress, new runway news 32, stand by for further instructions. Then go to all your aircrafts individually, as we just said, Hotel India Romeo first. Hotel Bravo Charlie India Romeo at present position make left-hand orbits until advised. When you observe Hotel India Romeo starting to hold, you can then instruct Hotel Juliet Mike as well. Hotel Bravo Charlie Juliet Mike at present position make left-hand orbits until advised. You can hold the aircraft as long as you need. In this example, of course, there is no need to do so, because you don't have any other traffic. You could have also just instructed a 180 turn. For example, Hotel India Romeo, make a 180 and proceed on downwind runway 32, number 1. But remember, if you do have other traffic, your circuit traffic has not the highest priority. As soon as you have a gap for the traffic, you can instruct them now to continue for the new runway. Now, of course, Hotel India Romeo is number 1 and Hotel Juliet Mike is number 2. So instruct the pilots as follows. Hotel India Romeo, number 1 runway 32, join direct base. Hotel Juliet Mike, continue on downwind runway 32, number 2, number 1 Cessna and downwind. Remember to also move your strips correctly. In this case, switch the position of the two aircraft so that you keep the overview about your sequence. As you see, this is quite a useful technique to rearrange your traffic, especially if you have quite some circuit traffic which you have to integrate into your other inbound traffic. As circuit traffic has lower priority, holding is useful to first focus on the traffic with higher priority and staying safe. The next technique we're talking about is diverting your traffic to the inner points. Let's say, for example, you have an aircraft on climb out when you decide now is a good moment to change the runway. Maybe your downwind is already occupied with other circuit traffic and you need some space. In that case, instruct your traffic on climb out to proceed away from the airfield to an inner point. As soon as you have then room for this aircraft to include it again in your sequence, you can turn it anytime back to the field. Let's take a look at an example. Once again, you have two aircrafts doing circuit training on runway 14 for grass. Instead of holding the traffic on downwind, you instruct Hotel Juliet Mike as follows. Hotel Bravo Charlie Juliet Mike, due to runway change in progress, proceed to Sierra 1. Stand by for further instructions. Hotel Juliet Mike is now diverting towards Sierra 1. In the meantime, you can give Hotel India Romeo instructions as well. Let's say you decide to take him as number 1. In this case, you say, Hotel Bravo Charlie India Romeo, runway change in progress, new runway news 32. Make a 180 at present position and join downwind runway 32 grass, number 1. You now already gave Hotel India Romeo all the information he needs. You informed him about the runway change, gave joining instructions for the new runway and sequence information. Hotel Juliet Mike has in the meantime reached Sierra 1. You can either let him hold this position if you have other traffic with higher priority, or, if you have a nice gap, join him into the circuit again. Hotel Bravo Charlie Juliet Mike, new runway news 32. Join direct base runway 32 grass, number 2, number 1 Cessna on base. You could even join Hotel Juliet Mike from his present position direct into long final. The third possibility you have to rearrange your traffic is quite an easy and fast one. Let your aircraft maintain runway heading after takeoff, followed by a teardrop entry to join a base leg or even direct final. This is how it looks like. If you already know what you're going to do, then instruct your aircraft already before departure. Hotel Bravo Charlie India Romeo, after departure continue straight ahead due to runway change in progress, wind 050 degrees 4 knots, runway 14 for grass, cleared for takeoff. Now, when Hotel India Romeo is in his climb out, and as soon as it fits into your sequence, you can instruct him as follows. Hotel India Romeo, new runway news 32. When able, make a 180 to join direct final runway 32 grass, number 1. As mentioned, this is quite a fast and easy procedure, but it of course has to fit with your actual traffic situation. The last possibility to rearrange your traffic that is presented here is the use of the opposite side of the circuit. Let's say, for example, your aircraft is already on base when you suddenly have too much tailwind to let it land on the current runway. Instead of holding it at this rather impractical position or giving complicated instructions to make it turn around in the circuit, you can just use the following instruction. Hotel Bravo Charlie India Romeo, due to runway change in progress, continue on right base to join crosswind for runway 14 grass. Make sure that you are clear with the instructions in order to not confuse the pilot for which runway and in what circuit he needs to fly. And this is how it looks like in the simulator. No complicated turnaround procedures for the pilot, but he can just continue to fly straight ahead. For you, it requires some concentration to be correctly aware again of which circuit and direction you're using. Additionally, this procedure crosses your runway axis, so be aware of possible conflicts. An important point regarding all these techniques to rearrange your traffic for a new runway is the wake turbulence issue. Let's just take the example before, where you let the VFR traffic continue on base to join the circuit for the new runway on the opposite side. If you already want to depart an IFR traffic on the new runway, before your VFR traffic crosses the axis to the other side, and this IFR traffic has a higher wake turbulence category, you need to apply the 2-minute in-flight standard when you cross the IFR's flight path behind. In such a case, it would probably be better to keep your VFR on its side and let him orbit or make a 180. Remember, once you cross the flight path of an in-flight aircraft and there is a wake turbulence issue, a caution wake turbulence warning is not enough. This only works for 2 landing aircraft. For an in-flight crossing, you need to apply the 2-minute standard. To finish this video tutorial and to underline why the topic runway change is really important, here are some effects of tailwind you probably already know. Tailwind requires an increased ground roll of a departing as well as a landing aircraft. Arrivals additionally have a shallower approach than under headwind conditions. And aircrafts flying in tailwind are much more susceptible to turbulences, gusts, and speed variances. All these points make a tailwind condition to a dangerous situation for any aircraft. Keep in mind as well that already crosswind components can lead to hazardous situations, and the pilots need to approach the runway with an adjusted angle. As mentioned in the beginning, you're now going to watch a short video which illustrates the significance of the tailwind topic. It's about a VFR flight into Aspen and the pilot's consideration whether it is worth landing in tailwind conditions or staying on the safe side.
This should have been an easy flight, a scenic trip through the mountains on a gorgeous day. And then this.
Warning.
76491 traffic, Midfield Airborne.
Terrain. Caution.
Inside 6 guys.
Terrain. Terrain. Caution. Terrain.
November
Terrain.
5 Bravo Zulu, start your left turn when able, traffic 6 mile, final opposite direction.
How did we get here? Aspen's a short flight from our home base of Denver Centennial. Driving takes about 4 or 5 hours depending on traffic, but flying, only 45 minutes. The weather looks fine. The winds on arrival are forecast out of 260 at 4 knots. And while the wind favors runway 33, Aspen's operational flow prefers us straight into runway 15 if we're able, and a 4-knot tailwind is well within our capabilities. So that's the plan, a fast flight into Aspen, arriving on runway 15. The flight's fast. Even with a headwind, we're picking up 146-knot ground speed. And as we approach Funds, the last fix before Aspen, I'm starting to eye the weather. We're about 46 nautical miles out, and with the mountains, that means we won't pick up ATC until we're closer. This is where ADS-B or XM weather comes in. I had the latest Aspen METAR, and the winds have picked up from 360 degrees at 9 knots. That tailwind component is higher than I wanted, and close to our limit of 10. While landing on 3.3 isn't the airport's preferred option, it's starting to look like the best choice. And then we start to pick up ATC. It's still pretty far out, so it's coming through pretty weak, but that's one of the advantages of ANR. It can pull down the engine noise.
Aspen Tower information, Quebec 18530, wind 350 at 9er, gust 16, visibility 10, sky clear below 2000, temperature 7, dew point -6, altimeter 30, use caution, runway 5, strong tailwind conditions exist.
That's not what you want to hear. Strong tailwind conditions exist. So now landing on runway 15 is looking pretty risky. Tailwinds may be one of the least understood risks in general aviation. You can handle a lot of headwind, but even a CRJ has a 10-knot tailwind limit. First, your ground speed on approach is faster with a tailwind, and that means you need a faster descent rate to hold your approach angle. With a 10-knot headwind and an 85-knot final approach speed, we'll descend at 400 feet per minute on a normal 3-degree glide slope. Spin that around to a 10-knot tailwind, and we need a 500 foot per minute descent rate. Plus, we're landing at 7,800 feet, which means we're flying a higher true airspeed, roughly 15% faster than our airspeed indicator reads. As we round out into our flare, we need to slow down that descent rate, which is already tough enough. But as we enter the flare, friction from the ground will slow down that tailwind. We'll feel like we're gaining a little headwind, which will make us float and possibly balloon. And on this high altitude landing, we're already touching down 15% faster than normal. And that's why so many landings that end up off the end of the runway start with a tailwind. Aspen's runway is long, 8,000 feet, which helps us manage that risk, but all of these problems also increase the chance of losing directional control, which again makes you ask the question, why would you ever land with this tailwind? Right, we won't. We have a couple of outs. First, we'll ask for runway 33, and most of the time at Aspen, you'll get it. If traffic's too tight and ATC can't accommodate us, we can head over to Eagle. It's about 25 miles away to the north, and the airport's much more open. A headwind landing there is no problem. But first, ask.
Aspen approach, November 333, Alpha November.
November 333, Alpha November, Aspen approach, go ahead.
333, Alpha November is 20 miles northeast of the Red Table VOR. We're wondering if we can get a approach for runway 33 in Aspen.
November 333, Alpha November, roger, you can expect that.
Ask, and you shall receive. The arrival into Aspen can be a little intimidating, but it doesn't get much more stunning. We'll head towards the Red Table VOR. It's a landmark often used by Aspen Approach. It sits on the first of two ridges. This one's Red Table Mountain. As you cross, you should be about 12,500 feet. The mountain reaches 11,500 to 12,000 feet, so you feel pretty close when you're coming over. Then you head for Rudai Reservoir.
Aspen Tower, Cirrus 333, Alpha November is over Rudai, inbound for runway 33.
November 33, Alpha November, Aspen Tower, report entering downwind.
We'll report downwind 33, Alpha November.
And then over the second ridge and into the Roaring Fork Valley, and you should have Aspen in sight. As we join the downwind, you realize that 9,000 foot pattern altitude isn't as high as it sounds, and that hill to our left, I'm getting the feeling that if we tap the brakes, we'd slow down. Regardless of the terrain, there's one advantage to flying a pattern: standard configurations. So flaps down to 50% and we slow to 100 knots. We're expecting a smooth base to final and an easy landing.
November 3, Alpha November, proceed to the city of Aspen and hold until further advice.
And that.
Hold until advised, 3 Alpha November over Aspen.
Hold over the city, which Swain coolly points out the issue.
That's like tight, what the heck?
It is, so let's get ready to add some power in there.
I hadn't considered that today is President's Day, one of the busiest weekends in ski country, which means that my opposite direction landing is screwing up their flow. So I have to circle until they can find a gap. Normally circling over the city is frowned upon. The biggest reason is noise. Aspen likes its peace and quiet, and they do get a lot of traffic even on a normal day, so they ask you to avoid the city. But when ATC needs to park you in the sky, the city's a close spot. From a flying perspective, there are some other concerns, like terrain, which by now you've probably picked up on. If we had a significant wind, even 20 knots would do, we could find some wicked up and down drafts in the valley, which would make holding even more dangerous. Lucky for us, today isn't too windy. So, should we climb? 9,000 feet puts us pretty close to that terrain, and the perspective system won't let us forget about it.
Warning.
491
Terrain.
traffic, Midfield Airborne.
Terrain. Caution.
Inside 6,
Terrain. Terrain.
Climbing up would make a landing more difficult. We only have a short base to final to make it down from pattern altitude to the runway, which is about 1,100 feet. And from the sound of the radios, we're not going to have a lot of time to make that approach, so we need to stay in position. Our flaps are still down at 50%, so should we pull them up? In this case, no. We'll fly at 100, and leaving our flaps down gives us a wide margin on our stall speed. Plus, we've got plenty of power, and any faster than 100 knots would make those turns a little too tight for my taste. So, for now, we just need to keep a close eye on the terrain.
Service 3 Alpha November,
Terrain.
enter right base runway
Terrain.
33.
Right base 333 Alpha November.
The arrival's pretty textbook. Swain flies a smooth base to final, lines up, and makes a nice touchdown. On centerline like a pro. On taxi out, we really get the full picture of how busy this airport is. Falcons, Challengers, Gulfstreams, they're stacked 3 deep on the ramp. So you have to ask, was landing on runway 33 a good idea? Or should we have taken runway 15 like everyone else? Being busy doesn't change the tailwind, and we're not a Challenger, we're a Cirrus. High traffic shouldn't pressure us into making a bad decision. Either the winds needed to die down, or we needed to go somewhere else. ATC worked their magic here. They found a way to accommodate us. And if they couldn't, we would have made a video about diverting and landing at Eagle.
ATC worked their magic. Well, that may be a bit exaggerated, but as you have seen in this video, tailwind is an issue that needs to be taken really seriously. But you have also seen enough techniques in this tutorial that help you change your runway in the right moment, in order to operate under safe wind conditions again. For this, no magic is required, but just some practice in the simulators. That's been it with this tutorial. You've seen doing a runway change is not a big deal, and you have several possibilities to work with your traffic. Be aware though, that such situations require an especially high concentration from you to keep the overview about your runway and circuit directions. Memorize all the actions that are required from you in case of a runway change, and work on the different techniques to rearrange your traffic when you go to the simulator. The BTS exercises 9 to 13 are all dealing with runway changes. Exercise 14 will then again be a standard VMC exercise. Make sure you understand all the rules and techniques that were presented in this tutorial to be well prepared. You can replay this video as many times as you wish, so use the chance to get really familiar with the runway change procedure. Thank you for watching, and good luck in the simulator.